There is this sort of notion of purity in yoga, but if you go to India, even in modern day, there's certain sects, sects, sects of yogis who sit by the Ganges River. They're smoking the chillum like in modern day, and they're yogis, worshiping Lord Shiva. And some people say the origin of yoga itself, when you go back, 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 years, in the ancient Vedas, the earliest yoga texts, there's mention of this green, fragrant elixir that makes you fly and talk to deities. I don't think mushrooms are green and fragrant. So I'm trying to think like, what's green and fragrant that makes you fly? It's got to be cannabis, right? So this is ancient yoga text. And so when I do sometimes feel like judgment or some shade from the yoga community, I think it's really validating to know that these ancient Vedas mentioned this elixir. They call it the elixir of immortality.
Welcome to Higher Spirits, a podcast of elevated cannabis conversations with me, your host, Lexi Kafka. Here we explore the powerful intersections of cannabis, spirituality, and mindfulness to better understand how to cultivate a conscious relationship with this plant. We journey with thought leaders and experts who bring a unique perspective on how cannabis connects us deeper to ourselves, our history, and the planet. Hello, plant fam. Welcome back to Higher Spirits. I'm your host, Lexi Kafkas, and today I'm talking with Dee Dussault, the woman who coined the term Ganja Yoga and pioneered cannabis-enhanced yoga in North America. She literally wrote the book on it. It's called Ganja Yoga, and it's been a foundational text for so many of us who are exploring plant-enhanced yoga. Now, Dee may have brought this practice into the public eye in the West, but cannabis and yoga is not a modern wellness trend. This pairing has ancient roots. In Hindu tradition, both are linked to Lord Shiva, who is the original yogi or the Adi yogi, and also the Lord of Ganja or the Lord of Weed. Sadhus have been smoking chillums and drinking bhang in spiritual practice for thousands of years, and some even believe cannabis is directly referenced in the Vedas. These are sacred ancestral tools, and although they may have been buried by prohibition, they've not been lost to time. If you know me, you know that cannabis yoga is literally my favorite thing to do. I've been practicing yoga for almost 15 years and have been teaching for 4. And long before I read Dee's book, I had already fallen in love with the combination. Cannabis transformed my personal practice from a more like power style vinyasa. Honestly, it was a workout for me, to a more slower, deeper, somatic, and more embodied practice, which is much more aligned with the true teachings of yoga. And I've watched it do the same for so many others. In this episode, we talk about how to approach the practice with intention, how to be mindful of cultural appropriation, the racist history of prohibition, and the privilege we hold as people using this plant legally today. We also touch on cannabis as a tool for sensuality, softness, and emotional healing, especially in connection to feminine wisdom. If you're interested in learning more about Dee, Ganja Yoga, or her trainings, be sure to check out the site and socials linked in the show notes. Now, let's get into it and let's get higher. Hello everyone. Welcome back to Higher Spirits. I am so excited for our guest today. We have Dee Dussault here, who is an internationally recognized yoga teacher who specializes in teaching Ganja Yoga, which is a beautiful combination of plant medicine and yoga, and also the author of the book Ganja Yoga, which I learned so much from in my path to be both a yogi and a teacher. So I'm so excited to have you here today. Dee, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yes, amazing. Well, we can dive in. I mean, yoga and cannabis has been, I can't emphasize how influential in my life. It's helped me heal injuries and get in touch with the somatics of my body. It's helped me manage anxiety and get into the mind. And I continue to this day. It's my favorite ritual to have with the plant. So I'm so curious, like, what is your relationship with the plant? How did you come to this divine duo of weed and yoga?
I love that divine duo. It's so true. And yeah, so I was a late bloomer to cannabis. I got into it kind of more in my late 20s. I tried it in high school, and sometimes I would just find it would get me very paranoid. So I kind of gave it up through high school and college, even though my friends smoked and my mom smoked and my friends even smoked with my mom. But for me, it just didn't click. But yoga, I've been doing since I was 15. I was always like last pick for team sports in elementary school, like long, gangly arms. And when I found yoga, I finally found like a physical practice that worked for my body and didn't have that competition. So yoga I had been doing, for a long time. When I finally tried cannabis again in my late 20s, and like, I did it with the right set and setting, all these things we know now, not a party with a bunch of random testosterone fueled men around. No. And I started to feel immediately like it made me more embodied, more sensual, all the things we like to do are even better high when the dose is right. So, okay, ice cream tastes better, comedy's more funny, stargazing's more interesting. And then yoga was, yeah, not only more embodied, but I felt more like the kind of those esoteric aspects, the chakras and the flow of energy. I felt kind of this subtle, more trippy feeling with yoga instead of just sort of focusing on the poses. So that was my introduction to it. And, I was just in a yoga training at the time and I kind of felt like a little guilty. Like, am I cheating? Because this makes yoga way better. Like, does everyone know about this? Like, is this okay? And my teacher told me there's like a whole lineage from ancient Hinduism to worship Shiva, who's the lord of cannabis and the lord of yoga. So the same sort of deity is responsible for both. And she's like, this is a valid path. You want to be mindful. There's potential pitfalls, but it's a path of yoga. So I coined the phrase Ganja Yoga and started classes, in my living room in Toronto in 2009, which, feels like such a lifetime ago. Yeah. So going from like, not using cannabis and even having some shame, my mom used it, it's in the 80s and 90s, having a bit of shame, the war on drugs, now being, a leader in the cannabis wellness movement and a pioneer of Ganja Yoga. It's just kind of an interesting 360.
I mean, I totally empathize with that. There's so many people in this industry who have like been stoners since the age of like 12 or something. And I actually came to the plant pretty late. I would say around like 23, I really started to like it. So that's late kind of on the journey. And so I completely empathize with that. It wasn't until later in life that I came to the plant too. So I love that. And I'm so happy that you immediately brought up the fascinating history and interweavings of cannabis and yoga because I mean, I think a lot of people are like this, right? I was like hitting my vape or getting high before class, like thinking it was illicit or like, right, going against the rules. And then you start realizing that maybe like half the class is also high and wondering why it's behind closed doors. And the more I talked about it, and as I got into my training too, I was like, whoa, Lord Shiva, the Adi Yogi, and also the Lord of Bang. There's something there. So I would love to share because I think it's a fascinating history and not a lot of people know about it. Could you dive into a little bit of your knowledge around
Yeah,
that?
I'd be happy to. Like, because, it's not only ancient India and yoga that has the history with yoga, with cannabis, which I'll go into in a second, but it's actually around the whole ancient world.
Oh,
Like, there's
wow.
evidence that every major religion has had cannabis as part of its history, maybe not a fundamental, huge part, but every religion, Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, all have, archaeological evidence that cannabis was used, in some way, which is just so interesting. So most of our ancestors would have used cannabis. It's wherever it grew around the world, the ancient world, it was used for medicine, it was used for spirituality, the hemp was used for rope. So I love knowing that in our DNA, our ancestors, unless we're from Antarctica or somewhere like that where it doesn't grow, our ancestors would have used it no matter our religion or our upbringing. But then with yoga, yeah, there is this sort of notion of purity in yoga. A lot of yogis are vegan, or maybe they don't swear, or they wear all white, or these sort of, we see kind of this one type of yoga. But if you go to India, even in modern day, there's certain sects, sects, sects of yogis who sit by the Ganges River. Sometimes they cover themselves with ash. They're smoking the chillum like in modern day, and they're yogis. They're not doing downward dogs and chaturangas. They're meditating. They're in an altered state of consciousness, worshiping Lord Shiva. So they're practicing the Shiva form of Hinduism, a form of yoga. So it's so interesting that not only around the world did people use cannabis, and in modern day yoga, there is still cannabis, And some people say the origin of yoga itself, when you go back, 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 years, how, Indian history, the mythology, is 10,000 years and longer, right? More than we can kind of explain with our Western mind. But even in, say, 3 or 5,000 years, in the ancient Vedas, the earliest yoga texts, there's mention of this green, fragrant elixir that makes you fly and talk to deities. I don't think mushrooms are green and fragrant. So I'm trying to think like, what's green and fragrant that makes you fly? It's got to be cannabis, right? So this is ancient yoga text. And so when I do sometimes feel like judgment or, maybe, yeah, just some shade from the yoga community, I think it's really, validating to know that these ancient Vedas mentioned this elixir. They call it the elixir of immortality.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that's amazing. So it's like we have our personal experience of, all the ways cannabis helps us, in moderation, with mindfulness, all of these things we can talk about. But we have our personal subjective experience, and then we have these archaeological evidence to show that it was there just to validate even further. So we can just let go of shame as yogis and use it if we want to. And if we don't want to, that's also fine. It's also valid, of course. So I
Yeah.
love having just that little piece of history, though. It does, yeah, just add that extra layer of like, yeah, judge away because I know what I'm doing is like a real thing.
Yeah, it's so validating. And it's also just validating not for the practice, but for like that own internal compass and intuition. This actually is good. It feels good in my body, which goes against everything we've learned and all the stigma of this plant. And like you said, there is, I think, a particular stigma in the yoga community just because the pursuit of purity, and also the, you know, the awareness of not culturally appropriating, which I, as both a teacher and a practitioner or as a yogi, really am aware of. So it is validating, and it's also, I think, a beautiful practice to share with people and an interesting line to tread. So I'd be curious, like, how do you make conscious awareness when you're teaching or even in your personal practice to avoid any type of cultural appropriation?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's really important whether we're including cannabis or not, and whether
Yeah,
we're
true.
teaching yoga or practicing. Practicing is one level, and then teaching it's another level. And then if we add cannabis or other additions to our yoga, it's another level. And so, knowing that it was there historically kind of gives, that validation in a way that goat yoga or beer yoga or, no judgment, just to say they're not ancient Indian practices the way Ganja yoga actually is. So that's pretty
Great point.
cool. And yet I think it's important. Like I always say, I was the first, my lighting just changed. I was the first Western yoga teacher to publicly offer classes. And that's true. There was, maybe in the 60s and 70s, there were hippies doing it, but we don't have evidence of it. So I can say, with certainty when I Googled it, there were no other teachers talking about it. There
Uh,
was dispensaries, I think in the 90s or early 2000s in California that would offer yoga classes, but you had to medicate out in the parking lot in your car. So that's,
mhm.
kind of, but it was the first teacher to sort of say, at our yoga studio, we're going to consume together. So I say that with confidence, but I also always make a point to say that I didn't create or come up with the idea that, it's an ancient Indian thing. And we need to really acknowledge that it's, something that I'm sure the ancient yogis are happy around the world. People are doing yoga. We're more relaxed. We're more peaceful, but we do need to acknowledge our lineages, the teachers that came before us, especially if we come from a genetic lineage like I do of, a British lineage. So my ancestors would have been directly involved in the colonization of India. And, it just gives me shivers to think about it. And it's extremely brutal beyond the more I learn, the more brutal I realize it was. And so I really want to name that and name that as a white person, continue to benefit from that colonization, even though I don't agree with it and don't like it. So I think we do need to name that. And so it doesn't mean every single class we have to say, yoga started in India. We have our different ways of naming that and owning that. But just to like always remember, yoga is not an American invention. It's not started in the West or by white people 20 years ago. It's not Lululemons. All of these things are great. The more yoga, the better, but we do need to name that so that we're not appropriating, we're appreciating.
Yeah. Yeah. So important. I'm glad that you bring that in. And I've taken some of your online classes, and I know that you bring breath work in, and I think bringing things like pranayama and just making the point to if you're going to use Sanskrit, pronounce it correctly, and all there's small ways that which we can do that. So I've been aware of your sense of it. So thank you. And thanks for sharing other ways that we can do that. I think it's very important. We're benefiting. I mean, even just the amount of racism surrounding the plant, taking yoga out of it. So, I mean, I benefit in so many ways of being a white presenting woman and cis woman using cannabis, especially before it was legal. So I always try and recognize that as well when consuming the plant.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. It's so important. Just, it's a privilege that we get to use it for wellness and spiritual
Yeah.
evolution when other people doing the exact same thing in a certain state and a certain color of skin is going to be put behind bars. And, you probably know that even though white people and Black people in America tend to use cannabis on the same rates, Blacks are like way more likely to be incarcerated. And so it's just, we have to keep saying it until it doesn't need to be said. And when I say that, I was the first Western teacher to publicly offer classes, I named the privilege there. Like if I was a Black woman in Toronto, Canada in 2009, approaching yoga studios to do, to smoke on site, would I have had the same privileges? Would people have allowed me? Would the New York Times have done a story? Would HarperCollins have invited me to write a book? Like there was so much privilege there. It doesn't mean I'm not deserving and worthy and I haven't worked hard. Both can be true, right? It doesn't take away all the hard work I've done. It's just to say that I wouldn't have had this amount of success necessarily, like very likely if I had been a different skin color. It's disgusting. It's sickening,
Yeah. Yeah. And also grateful for the plant because it opens up the avenue for us to have these conversations and name, like being able to blatantly name the craziness in society of that. So yeah, we'll continue to say it until it doesn't need to be said anymore. Thank you. That's a great line. Yeah. So what do you think makes cannabis so particularly special for this, like as such a powerful tool for accessing that like embodied presence, that somatic feeling, that deeper state of awareness more than other plant medicines maybe?
Yeah, I think, I did a psychedelic guide training and he specifically talks about cannabis as a psychedelic. And a lot of people say it's like a light psychedelic or a weaker psychedelic. But
Yeah.
he's like, it depends on dose. A strong edible can be just as strong as, other psychedelics. But what makes cannabis different is not that it's less strong, but that it's more somatic. Like it is more of a felt embodied sense than, even mushrooms or ayahuasca can be because we have endocannabinoid receptors throughout every tissue, every organ, every thing in our body. It's so cool. So, when we imbibe or consume our cannabis, it's going to all of our body tissues. And I think what's really interesting about that is that, we all have unexpressed emotional tensions, things we haven't said, tears we never let ourselves cry, screams we never got to scream, things we didn't get to say. We can call it trauma or we can call it unexpressed emotions, but they're held in the body biochemically, that we can measure the secretions in our fascia, in our tissues. And so the cannabis is going to where our tensions and our stresses and our emotions and our traumas are held. And it gives us the opportunity to actually feel into some of these things. So sometimes my students have said like, well, when I smoke, I know cannabis is anti-inflammatory and people use it for pain relief, but I sometimes feel more tension in this certain part of my body. And it's like the cannabis is showing you what you're carrying. And yeah, and it could be like your backpack or your computer, but it could be something that happened when you were at school and you did this reaction, but you didn't get to finish the response. So your body's holding something. So it gives us a chance to feel, you got to feel it to heal it. So I think that embodied somatic aspect is what makes it so helpful as a psychedelic, as a yoga practice, and also like, in the bedroom so that we can just sort of feel everything more deeply.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk about that second part of the sensuality part with you because that's been like a huge part of my journey that I actually haven't had a chance to like talk to anyone about a lot. But it's interesting that you brought this up because I actually have been experiencing this recently. When I consume cannabis, I feel so much heaviness and tension in my body. And I it hasn't happened before. Sometimes I'll feel it in like particular spots. Like I carry a lot in my neck. Sometimes when I smoke, I get a little tightness in my neck. But I've been feeling it and I've been kind of reflecting and I'm like, what is this showing me? Like it's interesting. And I am thankful for this practice because it's not in my mind. Sometimes I'm like, I don't want to feel that way, so I'm not going to consume. But I also am recognizing I'm like, I'm really holding on to something in my body right now. And the only thing that expels it is movement. So recently, cannabis is getting me into movement more than it ever has. So I think I love that you brought it up. I'm directly experiencing that. Your student is definitely not alone.
Yeah, definitely. So it's like, it's time and place. Sometimes it's not appropriate to go deep into my unexpressed emotions. I just want to take a puff or two before a concert. I don't want to go deep, right? So we use our intention, what do I want the plant to help me with tonight or today? And then I use my dosing and I use my mindfulness, all these different skill sets and tools to sort of change the experience. Obviously, dose is a big one. And then the, terpene content or the strain is a big one. But our intention actually goes so far in changing the flavor of how the cannabis works with us. So
Yeah.
if I intend, like, I want to be chill, I just want to work on a little crafting project tonight. I'm not like looking to go deep. Part of it will be the dose, but part of it will just be saying that and
Yeah.
inviting that, and then it's like, no, I really do want to, what is this tension I'm feeling in my body? I'm going to take a 2 hour breath work or movement or walk in the woods and actually feel it and breathe into it and move through it and let it pass.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. The intention is so important. Yeah. It is everything. Unlike other plant medicines, I think, of course, you always go into certain ceremonies with an intention, but I like to say some stronger psychedelics bring you what sometimes it's not what you intended for. But I found with cannabis, it really usually is on track with what you bring to the experience because it is more a manageable experience. Like you said, there can be the edible that flows you out into space, but I try usually not to work with those. So yeah, intention is everything. And I love that you said like the intention can be as quote unquote frivolous as crafting. It can be as frivolous as like, I want to laugh with my friends. Like that is an intention. It doesn't have to always be like working through some deep seated emotion or like overcoming a creative boundary. Like it can be so lighthearted. This plant is lighthearted.
It is, yeah. It's like knowing that we co-evolved with it, that it, existed on every continent except Antarctica, that all of our ancestors, not every single human ever that ever, but every continent used it, our ancestors used it. And some, the stoned ape theory suggests that our, cavemen becoming human, though that area was eating and, consuming all kinds of mushrooms and cannabis. And that's what created our prefrontal cortex and our ability to think more deeply and develop language and develop, philosophy and higher level thinking and religion. It's like because we were eating cannabis and other plants and starting to like, whoa, what is the meaning of life? Or, that's what got us out of sort of being more of a caveman or just a typical mammal, that we have this higher thought. So it's a theory, it's not proven, but I think it's a really delightful one. And I think it's true.
I think it's true too. And I think it's like why I think this movement of coming, the resurgence of psychedelics and plant medicine, cannabis being one, is really coming back rather than new. Like I think we're tapping into something that like you said, it's like deep into our genes, like so many generations back, like has always been there. Especially us as women, there's really particularly something that we have a connection to with these plants that I love the to dive into the witchiness of all
I was
that.
just going to say the word witch. Like I love, like, yeah, witchiness and working with herbs, working with nature. Our ancestors would have been using herbs of all types for medicine, for childbearing, at anything really. And so even taking a regular social or recreational cannabis, you're smoking with your friends, it's nothing witchy or nothing ritual. You could just take that moment and like, as you roll, take a breath to yourself or put a crystal on your rolling tray, or keep your cannabis in a gorgeous jar so that when you open it, you kind of, these mini rituals or mini witchy stuff that kind of just remember to treat it more sacredly, to be more
Yeah.
mindful. But then, yeah, you can go all the way and have like a full out, cannabis witchy ceremony with it, or on the full moon night, you charge your cannabis under the moon, or there's so many beautiful ways to use it. And because we typically do use the female plant, the male plant is not psychoactive. It has anti-inflammatory. It's still beautiful. We love males. Don't get me wrong. But it's the female that's the trippy one, right? The one that's expanding our consciousness and tapping us more deeply into our bodies. I think that's definitely noteworthy and definitely so beautiful. And it's Yeah, I think it is part of the feminine renaissance and the plant medicine renaissance are co-evolve, coming back together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No coincidence they're happening at the similar time and that they're weaving together. And yeah, I wanted to ask you about this. Just going to wait till later in the episode, but let's just dive in. Because your book was one of the first times that I really heard about cannabis. I knew it was like a dioecious plant, and then I thought it was like super dope that like the medicine came from the female plants. When you look at a field, it's all women plants. Like, love that. But you really spoke about the feminine essence and that more like yin energy of the plant, and it talked about like, yeah, the reawakening. I think you call it feminine wisdom, which isn't have any relation to gender. If anyone's listening to my podcast, I talk about this all the time. It has to do with the energy of it, right? That cyclical nature, your intuition, like the deep connection to nature. So I would love to know, how do you think this plant is supporting the like collective return to feminine energy and more of that intuitive embodied feeling?
Yeah, I appreciate that you said it's not about like what's between our legs, or how we present our gender, what our, that we all have some amount of feminine essence and some amount of masculine essence, or, we can just take those words away if they have like laden meaning, and we could call it yin and yang or yin and yang. And so the yin is the receptive, and we all have that in us to some degree, but it's been over the decades and the centuries and the millennia, the yin side of humanity has been denigrated and treated as less important than the yang, or the yang, as we say in America, but I think it's pronounced yang. That's that more creating, doing, activating, and that's important. It's amazing. We have to find our own personal balance. That's what the yin and the yang, the thing is all that symbol is all about, right? Which doesn't mean we live exactly 50-50 every moment of the day, but just that we allow ourselves to go both places with it. And with women entering the workforce, the last, couple of decades or century or whatever, we have all become much more young, much more focused on the outer appearance and what we can acquire, how we can, what we can kind of create in the world. It's all beautiful, nothing wrong with that. But what we've lost, or we've lost touch with, the more receptive and sensual and, like you said, cyclical, less linear, less, towers, more circles. And all of us would benefit from even some amount of cultivating that, which is, could be simple, like, sitting in a circle instead of, in a linear row in a yoga classroom is just one way to invite a more yin energy. Or choosing to cook, which, is like an ancestral feminine thing that all of us can do. Or there's just different ways to, bring back the yin regardless of our gender and what's between our legs. But cannabis, in part because it is the female of the plant that we smoke, but also because it taps us into our bodies and our sensualities, it can help all of us to be more embodied and receptive and intuitive and mysterious. It can help us to tune into the mysteries of life. We like to pretend and assume we know how the world works and the universe and all this, that we're the most intelligent beings, but it's actually a mystery. Why we're here, the meaning of life, the nature of consciousness, we don't know. And so cannabis actually reminds us to be humble and to love the mystery instead of, finding it annoying. My intellect needs to know. It's like, let's just live in the not knowing and write poems about it and massage each other and, just like be in the present.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. It absolutely lets me let go a little bit of life and accept the fact that it's a giant mystery and that it's all like play. It brings more play into like, I just don't take things as seriously. And some people might think that's a bad thing. I think the plant has gotten a bad rap for that a little bit, right? But man, do we need that. Do we take life so seriously, like to the point where we're all like this and like suffering from chronic anxiety? Like, I think I think it's time to chill out a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. We can be serious about having fun and serious about playing. We can keep the serious, let's be serious about having a good time.
Yeah.
People say cannabis is demotivating, and I don't want to disregard that it can be just like anything that brings pleasure. It can be abused or used unconsciously. It can be used less than mindfully or in ways that don't serve us. I think it's really important. We're talking about all the praises. It's important to name that, if we're using it in a chronic way, without reverence, without ritual, mindfulness, that it can hinder us and it can cause some demotivation. And that's not a positive for most people. But that's, a portion of the population and a portion of the use case. For the most part, like you're saying, a little bit of demotivation can be a good thing. Because if I'm constantly thinking about, attaining and producing and buying stuff and what are the Kardashians doing and Instagram, it's just like, let's just, it doesn't really matter. So a little bit of demotivation from that default reality that we're all kind of plugged into can be a good thing, where it's like, you know what? I don't have to answer my emails right now. I don't really want to anymore. I did enough today. I did
Yeah.
enough. We do enough for the most part, right? So I
That
think
is
it's
the
nice to be
beautiful
slightly
feminine.
demotivated.
Yeah. 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 Being kind with yourself. You did enough
Yeah,
today.
that's right.
Yes, that's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. That was, like I said, beautiful for me to learn so many years ago. And your book was one of the first places. So I also highly recommend anyone. The book, it does specifically talk about that feminine energy. So you've been on that train for a while. And I imagine that's also how you got to your sensuality work. Yeah, how did that transition, or was it a transition? Because is it a part of the yoga practice you do, or is it kind of a separate offering in
Yeah, I
study?
would say it's like separate. Of course, yoga is sensual, even if you're not trying to be sensual. Just any embodied thing that we're feeling, it's going to be.
Yeah.
It is separate for the most part. Like Ganja yoga classes, I'm not directly inviting sensuality or using that word. I do kind of keep it separate. Before I was doing all of this with Ganja yoga, I was in my master's degree studying sexuality. And I still really am interested in women's pleasure and women's orgasm. That's sort of just like to there's such a disparity even still after all this feminism and all this sexual empowerment between the orgasm gap between genders in heterosexual relationships. And with porn, it's just, people are putting less into sensuality and less into connectivity, foreplay, the things that are so good for all genders, but it's sort of become this thing that's like, my wife's nagging me for foreplay, and it's like, no, it's going to benefit you too, bro. So that's a passion of mine, and it is kind of related to Ganja yoga, related to yoga, but also kind of separate. So I work with couples. I do, coaching on like kind of pretty much helping them to do more sensuality, more foreplay. It's not X-rated sessions. It's more like, stroking each other's arms mindfully and just seeing how good it feels to slow down, and how the whole body can be an erogenous zone, and how cannabis, a good dose, not too much, just a like nice little dose for people who want to use it, can enhance that sensuality and also can reduce the speediness of the time we put into sex and to sensuality. It can kind of make us more languid, like, okay, yeah, I could just stroke my partner for 10 minutes. Like, I don't have to get right to the genitals or right to the orgasm. And it gives both partners more time to build up that erotic energy. So whether or not orgasm happens, it's just going to be more pleasurable and connected. And, it doesn't have to be with a partner, of course. An individual can do all this on their own as well. So even though it's, the offerings, I have like partner yoga sessions or sometimes partner yoga retreats, sensuality retreats, or women's empowerment, where it's just like all women and we're kind of using cannabis. And, again, it's not X-rated, but maybe we're doing hip gyrations and listening to Beyonce with a little weed just to kind of get in our groove. But that is, it's different than the Ganja yoga, just to kind of keep it separate. And so I do the Ganja yoga training. I train other yoga teachers to be cannabis-enhanced yoga teachers. But some of my students are like, are you going to offer like a sensual cannabis training or some other kind of like a different type of training? So that might be down the roster next year. We'll see.
Yeah. Cannabis has been, so when I started getting into like really, like I mentioned, I was kind of a late bloomer. One of the first things that I used it for was I was really struggling to have an orgasm. I had been sexually active for years and I wasn't really having an orgasm. And I realized that weed helped that a lot. I've experienced that firsthand myself. Absolutely. And not to say, like, at least in my personal journey, it helped me kind of unlock that ability. I wouldn't say, and I think maybe for a little while I became dependent on it, but I was able to then move past the plant because it helped me kind of connect to different energies in my body and, experience that type of ecstasy without the plant as well.
Totally. Like the more often we do something, our brain gets like a neural groove gets formed, right? So the first time I played baseball or something, I'm like, I don't know how to do this. But the more often, it becomes just in the brain as a literal groove. So the more often we experience profound relaxation, the more natural that becomes, or the more often we have orgasm, the more orgasmic we are. And then we don't need the cannabis as often to get there because it helped us to get that groove. But once we have the groove, we often can reduce, our use on cannabis. I'm currently I did a 10-day fast last month and I'm aiming to do a 3-week one now. And so I'm like 5 or so days in because I did notice.
Cannabis fast or
Yeah,
water
cannabis
fast?
fast. Oh, yeah,
Oh,
sorry,
okay.
not an orgasm fast.
Or an orgasm fast. What are we fasting from?
I noticed for me, like, because I moved to Canada this winter and I was kind of depressed, I was isolated, going through a heartbreak, all these things. And it definitely is reduced stress. It's a balm. I'm always going to love it and use it. But I was finding that just for me, it was becoming, like you said, a little bit of a dependency where I wasn't using my other tools as much, like breath work or journaling or therapy or, not as much as I know I wanted to. And also, I was talking with a friend and I was like, I think the cannabis is actually making me so chill that I'm tolerating a living situation that I don't want to be in. But without the cannabis, I'm going to become so disgruntled that I'll move. So I almost decide, I'm just seeing what life is like without it. And I've never done a 3-week fast before. I mean, I'm only on but last month I did 10 days. That was, so I think I know I can do this. And then I'm going to go back to it, but I know that I'll have a more reverent and mindful relationship. It won't be my crutch. So like I said before, we do have to be mindful. There are pitfalls and limitations to anything that brings pleasure. Cannabis does give us a big dopamine hit. So if we have ADHD, we already have a deficit of dopamine. So we can become more, I don't want to say addictive because it's not the same as like a real drug addiction, but there is a dependency factor, psychological addiction that even I've been making sure that I don't fall into that. I want to be extremely mindful. I think that that's so important, And so fasting is one way to reset our tolerance, reset our relationship. Other people, it's like, okay, I'm not going to fast, but maybe I use a vape as my first hit of the day, my first high, because I love smoking. But that first hit is going to be a vape just to delay the smoke. Or maybe it's switching our strains, switching our method of consumption, just sort of being like playing with it constantly without getting neurotic, but just playing with it so that we're always mindful.
I love the fact that you are a leader in this space and have been for so long. And you're also here admitting or sharing, I should say, that the plant it can have, you're not always in right relationship with it. You can form weird dependencies. I think that's so important. Thank you for sharing that. And 3 weeks, yes, you can do that. Heck
Yeah. And I'll be honest, I am using a THC tincture, but it's like, it does not enough I don't feel like I'm on an edible. It's just taking like the cravings down.
got
And
it.
I've been supplementing my endocannabinoid since, 2009. So I don't want to go completely cold turkey because we are mostly endocannabinoid imbalanced. I mean,
Yeah.
cannabis is a superfood supplement. So I don't want to deprive myself of the endocannabinoids that I need. So I am taking like a low dose tincture just to be transparent, but it's not like I don't feel it. I'm keeping myself supplemented with a bit of CBD and THC.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably good for your body instead of
Totally.
going cold turkey.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's easy to fall out of. I try and do a 33-day fast because they say it takes about 30 days for your endocannabinoid system to reset twice a year. It's always very difficult, but it feels good when you do it and the body feels good. And yeah, you come to the plant in a totally different way. But I go through phases of, or I should say, fast from smoking quite often. I'm in one right now because I find that it's harsh on my lungs, but I love the sensation of it. It's my favorite way to consume the plant. So sometimes I won't listen to my body and I just smoke and I kind of ignore it. And then I get to the point where I'm like, no, this is not the point of you using it. Now you're actually harming yourself more than you're doing good. So I have to take time away from the smoke as well.
Yeah.
Currently
It's
on.
my favorite method. I mean, I love dabs too, but I love smoking. I especially love the ritual of rolling. I love the taste of dabbing because I just love the terpenes and smoke. You don't really get the taste, but yeah, it's just the roll, like so nice.
It is so nice. And it's the closest, for me, to me, it's like the closest expression of the plant too. It's the most pure. It's not modified. It's just
Yeah.
straight flower.
And it's how our ancestors would have used it. Like, they
Yeah.
weren't dabbing and extracting.
No. Yeah, no dab rigs. Although we're making hash and amazing, amazing concoctions. I would be curious, is there any specific type or strains or ingestion methods that you specifically suggest both for yoga practice and for sensuality and intimacy practices?
Well, yeah, the benefit of smoking or, vaping is that, it hits you pretty fast. So you can tell if you want more or not. Whereas an edible, the timing is so delayed that sometimes people overconsume because they got impatient. So,
Yeah.
especially, and it's, if you're going to do a yoga practice, it's like, yeah, the timing of like, okay, I'm going to eat this edible and then in an hour I'll do yoga. It doesn't always work, or in an hour
Yeah.
I'll have sex. So I like smoking and vaping for that regard because it is more instant and you can titrate. And on the other hand, if you can get the edible timing and dosing right, like a nice little 5 milligram, or for some of us, maybe a 10, and the timing right, I do find edibles are much more embodied. I find for me, dabbing is the least embodied. It's the most
Mm.
sort of cerebral. So I haven't been dabbing this last year, but when I was really dabbing, I would do it in the morning and I wouldn't even need my morning coffee. I would get kind of like a real, like, I'm crisp, man, I'm clear, but it's
Yeah.
not necessarily like for yoga. It's more like, I'm going to do emails.
Mm.
But then on the other side, I think eating it's like, okay, let's just lay in bed and like make love all day, or let's like do some restorative yin yoga kind of vibes. It's so I do, but I don't recommend it for beginners, or I don't offer edibles at my Ganja yoga classes because of the delayed onset and the potential for over consuming. And it's just so uncomfortable to overconsume. As we don't say overdose since you can't die from cannabis. You won't, but it can feel extremely uncomfortable. It's some of the most uncomfortable, worse than even overconsuming alcohol. It can just feel really bad. So I'm really mindful not to offer edibles at short-term classes, maybe a retreat, something where we're going to be together. But if the person's comfortable with edibles, comfortable with cannabis, they're mindful of the dose and the timing. It can be really good for both sensuality and yoga. But mostly smoking or like a vape pen or vaping flower. That's sort of where I would recommend. And yeah, smoking can hurt the lungs and the throat. So I think, vaping would probably be the most yogic choice, vaping some flower. It does involve technology. It's not exactly ancestral, but everything has its pros and cons, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Tinctures are good, some THC tincture under the tongue, or, for people who want to explore the health benefits of cannabis, the anti-inflammatory aspects, they could take CBD tincture or CBD edible, or even smoker vape CBD flower. So
Yeah.
there's lots of options, which is so great. I love that there's so much more knowledge about not just, people trying to get the strongest strain. I mean, there are still people doing that, but hopefully more and more of us are like, okay, it's not just about the highest THC, because that's going to be like a high and then it's going to be a crash. But when we start to bring in all the terpenes and all the flavonoids and all the different compounds that I don't even know, hundreds of compounds, when we start to think about that, we're like, wow, it's really not about the THC. That's like part of it's called the entourage effect. The THC is the drummer or the lead singer, but we need the whole band, man. We need the whole band. So I love that we finally get this. Not every dispensary is going to have its cannabis labeled with all the terpenes and stuff, and different growers. Our friend Tina from Blue Maid Farm, they always have their terpenes like on their packaging. And when you open that sun grown, outdoor grown,
Mm.
regeneratively farmed, like I want to climb inside the package and like I want to like rub the cannabis flower all over my body, or like I want to just eat it. And like, I love it. It's just so good. Your mouth waters. And when you buy like, indoor grown, not grown with love, you open, you're like, I can barely smell anything. It smells like plastic. It really makes a difference. So, it's a luxury to get outdoor grown if you're not in California or another state like that. But if you are in Cali, find Moon Main Farms or another regenerative farmer, or grow it yourself even. And then it's grown with love, without pesticides and all the weird growth hormones they use. So,
Yeah.
so,
Yes. Oh my gosh, you said so many things there. And I'm just like, every single person I've brought on this podcast unsolicited, and here you are. I know you mentioned it in the book, so I was like, there's a chance she'll bring it up, but like, it's not just about THC. Stop chasing the percentages. Don't go into a dispensary and just buy what is the highest THC percentage. You don't look at what the highest percentage of proof is when you're buying a alcohol or a bottle of wine. Like, how did we end up here? It's a weird, and it's not, yeah, no. There's so many other elements to this medicine that make you feel totally different. And that's like you said, there's different ways to ingest it. There's different ways it's grown. There's different terpenes. So explore. I try and, yeah, encourage people to explore too. And I agree. If you are in California or in any state that you can get outdoor grown, it's better for you. It's a better high. It's better for the planet. There's absolutely no reason you should, especially in California, because it's like the best weed in the world. But yeah, we can steer away from that. And I also find that honestly, like smoking a really high THC, just like not super good weed, and then trying to do yoga, sometimes it does the opposite for me. It gets me so in my head. It's not helping me drop into my body. So I've also experienced where that's why I was asking. I was like, there's also a flower that I've had that doesn't optimize the yogic experience.
Yeah, totally, totally. I was just talking about that with a friend. Like, I'm noticing that I have, yeah, like more tiredness now when I smoke. My 30s, I could just kind of wake and bake and like, and then now I'm mid 40s and it's like, is this like perimenopause affecting my cannabis tolerance? My friend's like, no, I think it's actually just that the indoor grown stuff is getting more and more, hybridized and, weird growth agents and all this stuff that it's like hitting our bodies in a different way. So our bodies are rejecting it, or maybe we're getting anxious or, more lethargic. So it's not necessarily related to aging. I mean, who knows? Maybe it is. But another theory is that it's just like because I'm here in Canada, so it's not outdoor grown. I miss California so much. But so it could be, yeah, the cannabis and not me, not aging, not yeah. I'd love to blame everything on perimenopause if possible, but in this case,
It might be, yeah, it might also be the weed.
yeah,
But yeah, I completely agree. And I will notice that actually. I was talking to Tina about this and I was like, I've been smoking New York weed and I'm getting really sleepy after. And then I got some Moon Made and I'm like, it's just, it lets you down more gently. It's just, you don't have that crash. So I do completely agree that can often be the flower as well. And yeah. Yeah, amazing. You're doing so much work. I'm curious to know, like, you've been doing Ganja Yoga now since 2009. That is a long time. So what are you working on now? Like, what's lighting you up? What's really getting you up in the morning and making you excited?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you for asking. I would say, I love doing these psychedelic women's retreats. So I do them twice a year in California. I'm doing one in Antigua in a couple of weeks. And so we use cannabis and wear legal mushrooms. So in California, there's like a way to use mushrooms legally because there's a church you can join. So we do a low dose mushroom, optional low dose mushroom. Antigua will be cannabis only. But I love the all women's space and doing like plant medicines together in beautiful locales. So that's one thing that just really, because, as I said, I studied sexuality and I studied women's pleasure. So just having a space where all women can be together and use plants for self-care and wellness. So that's one piece. And then the other is I have a Ganja Yoga training. I've actually had to I've chosen to rebrand off this phrase Ganja Yoga. It's kind of like a long story, but Facebook has prevented me from running ads. Instagram shadow bans me. I can't trademark it. There's all these different things. So I've let it go. So it's fine. It is what it is. And now I can also include mushrooms as part of the training. So it's the plant infused yoga training. And so I'm revamping the whole training. I started it in 2018 and I started it because I started going to other people's cannabis yoga classes and I was finding that it was just like almost like regular studio vinyasa with the right. And it's like, no. Like that's, not safe physically, emotionally, all these different levels. Like at the very least, anyone who's watching, whether or not they take my training and you want to start incorporating cannabis in your yoga classes as a teacher, just slowing it down, doing more hatha, yin, restorative. And I know yoga, people think it has to be a workout. It's the studio culture yoga. Let's rewrite yoga or go back to what yoga really is, which is about slowing down, being mindful and stretching, not necessarily losing weight and attaining hard poses. So the main thing is like I was seeing like, okay, I don't know if we should be doing like so many chaturangas while high or, especially if they're not going to be perfect alignment, like really safe. Someone who's new to yoga and maybe newer to cannabis, it's not going to work. So I started the training for that reason, and I'm revamping it now to include that mushroom piece and to include more about finding ways to work within the law. I'd been kind of finding gray zones, you could say. I mean, federally in the US, it's not legal. So, here in Canada, there is that privilege and luxury. But so that might mean like advising my students to do retreats somewhere like Jamaica, where it is fully legal, or a private VIP only class, or medical card only, or CBD only, finding ways to, as this industry grows, both the cannabis and the mushroom industry, to find ways to keep ourselves as compliant as possible. Because especially with different political things that we won't go into, we just never know, how it's going to go. So I'm revamping the training to include more about trauma-informed yoga, more about
Mm.
the legal piece, and then more about running a successful cannabis yoga business. Because I've had issues, like I said, not only with being shadow banned on Instagram and not able to do ads, but payment processors don't work, like Stripe, credit card, all these. So it's like, how do we build lucrative, successful, sustainable brands, businesses in this? So I just did a year-long business training, and I'm taking everything I'm learning and putting it specifically into cannabis yoga. So the whole training is going to be revamped. And I'm launching that actually on June 21st, International Yoga Day. So if you're interested or your viewers are interested, I'll be doing a live event a couple days before that, a free live training before that, so people can get a taste for what the certification is about. So that's really exciting to me. I think I've trained about 250, maybe 300 people over the years. And like, I've had people take this training from the Middle East, from Africa, from Europe, like South America, North America, like Australia, New Zealand, like, people have trained with me. I don't know if they're out there kind of doing classes or doing them more privately. I don't know. But I love knowing that this is like a global movement that's making the world a more relaxed place, a more place, more community, more goodness, mindful cannabis. I'm so proud of myself and proud of all my graduates for what they're creating. It's really, really awesome.
That's beautiful. And it's so impactful. Yeah, it's like when you zoom out, you really are bringing something special that's supporting people. And I think it's really mindful that you mentioned that you are trying to stay more within the boundaries of the law for a few reasons. You're running a business. So, like, how can you successfully run a business without, like you said, being worried that your payment processor, which has happened to me with cannabis yoga classes, just like they were like, crazy. I was like, how did you know there was cannabis? I didn't say anything.
I know. I even rebranded and they still aren't allowing me to do, but I was like, I changed the name of my company and everything.
Yeah.
Like, what do you need, man?
Yeah, it's really difficult. So I think that's really, really great and helpful for people. And you're shifting mindset in a more positive way. Like you said, the world needs more yoga. And that's not a bad thing. Um, and well, I guess that perfectly brings me to a question that I like to close with all of my guests is you if cannabis like was a more globally accepted in society, how do you think it would prove, or how do you think the potential for cannabis is to improve our society and our culture in general?
Like, there's a reason why it's illegal in most of the world. Cannabis and other psychedelics, like I'm a fan of all the plants. Um, there's a reason why the powers that be don't want us to relax and connect to
Yeah.
ourselves and think about trippy stuff and love the mystery and slow down and have more orgasms. There's a reason, maybe call me a conspiracy theorist, but this is a powerful plant that can help us to do powerful things. Because when we regulate our nervous system, when we heal our trauma, when we take time for our self-care and to connect and all the things we were talking about, then we are change makers. We're not passive people that believe everything we hear on the news or on social media. We actually think critically and we can choose to opt out of comparing ourselves or buying something because we have low self-esteem. And then that topples, dysfunctional capitalism and topples dysfunctional patriarchy and all these dysfunctional systems. So I do believe that the more we mainstream it, these conversations, even if we change one person's mind and they're like, let me start with CBD or let me start with a low dose edible or let me talk to my grandma about how it can help with pain, or just as we slowly trickle and slowly change, these systems are crumbling and they're scared. They're scared. That's why there's so much, millions of dollars in anti-cannabis propaganda, even in places where they're legalizing it. They're still fighting it. It's just like, you want our tax dollars, but then you also want to try to shame us. And, it's so interesting. Or, you're not allowed to sell cannabis beside a bar or beside a school, but then there can be two bars on the same street, but there can't be two cannabis stores on the same street. Like, they treat it like this weird vice, and yet it's like a tax. I don't know. You know what I mean? So I think that we're in a psychedelic renaissance with cannabis and other medicines. And I'm so excited about the future. The more we mainstream and normalize, especially when we couple it with mindful yogic practices and mindful yoga too. So I'm excited.
I'm excited too. Hopefully we change more than one person's mind, but you're right. If we just change one person's mind, it's so worth it. And yeah, so thank you for the work that you do. So, so important. It's influenced me drastically. I know it's influenced hundreds, thousands of other people. And it's a pretty radical act, especially like you said, to put yourself out there at such an early time. 2009 was a very different climate than it is now. So I want to honor the fact that you did that. So thank you. And thanks for all your teachers that came before you that supported you in doing that, because you've helped a lot of people.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I took that in.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me today. A beautiful conversation. I love women supporting other women and inspiring each other and uplifting each other. So I appreciate the work that you do to elevate other women in the industry, other people, and also to elevate our favorite plants. So good job.
Thank you. Thank you. So great. Thanks, Dee. Don't forget to subscribe to support this plant-powered exploration. And if you have any questions, are curious, or have ideas for collaborations, give me a follow on Instagram at HigherLexi. I also want to remind you that we're not making any medical recommendations or claims on this podcast. And if you do choose to explore cannabis, please do so mindfully. And until next time, keep the vibe high, friends.